Good evening. It's good to see all of you back again tonight. We're going to continue our study in the book of James. We started this morning, and tonight we're going to spend time in James chapter 2. And we'll also spend some time in Matthew chapter 25. All afternoon, Noah has had a song going through his mind. And it's a song that Brother Jason led this morning. We'll work till Jesus comes, we'll work. So all afternoon, at periodic times throughout our afternoon, you can hear it on different corners of the house. We'll work till Jesus comes. I appreciate my boys. They teach me lessons. I hope I teach them lessons, and they're gonna turn into fine men here soon. Fine young men right now. So in James chapter 2, this morning we took time and I kind of joked, you know, I had a whole lot more material planned this morning for us to move on to a different aspect of our lesson. But we're going to pick up where we left off this morning, and we're going to continue with that. And that extra piece that I had decided to try and do tonight, we'll do that a different time. So y'all hang on to this lesson. There'll be a test. The passage that we skipped over in our review piece of the book of James comes from James chapter 2, starting in verse number 14. Now, I think it's pertinent for us to read Scripture, and I apologize this morning. We read one or two Scriptures out of each chapter, and we talked about it a bunch. So tonight, let's change it up, and we're going to read from verse 14 down through verse 26, the end of that chapter. So James chapter 2, starting in verse number 14, read along with me, please. It says, "What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and hath not works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say to them, Depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding you give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? Even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. Yea, a man may say, Thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. Thou believest there is one God, thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble. But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he had offered Isaac his son upon the altar? Seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect? The scripture was fulfilled, which said, Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. Ye see then how by works a man is justified, and not by faith only. Likewise also was not Rahab the harlot justified by works when she had received the strangers, and had sent them out another way? For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also." The whole point of our overview this morning was to hone in on the things that faith does, or the things that with faith you can do. So I want to ask you tonight, I'm going to ask you, go ahead and raise your hands. How many of you here tonight have faith? Thank you for entertaining me. I want you to remember that you raised your hands to say that you have faith. Do you know why? Because you still have to prove it. See, talk is cheap, right? It's easy for us to say, well, yeah, I believe, I have faith, right? And I was telling the teenagers, you know, it's not like you can look at someone and just see this aura around them that glows and radiates. You know, when I was younger, I used to look at our preacher, and I didn't wear glasses for a long time, and so he was a little fuzzy, and the light would kind of almost seem to kind of shimmer around his outline. So if I take off my glasses and I look out at y'all, you know, sometimes if I squint real hard, there's kind of a shimmery outline of you, and I thought, oh, that's the Spirit. No, it's my eyes playing tricks on me is what it is. There's not an aura to be seen around someone who says they have faith. So how do you prove, or how do you show that you have faith? That's what James is writing about here. You know, faith proves itself by works. Talk is so cheap. I have the best intentions, and I have done lessons up here where I tell you, I want to be true to my word. I want to hold to my commitments. I want to do the right thing, and I'll make promises, and thankfully y'all are forgiving and merciful towards me, and you'll either remind me that, hey, you agreed to do this, or you won't hold me accountable for the things I agreed to do that I've forgotten about. Faith requires that follow-up action. Talk is so cheap, and everybody is able to do it, but we're commanded to be more. We're commanded to show our faith by our works. I want you to keep a finger there in James chapter 2. I'm going to put my little marker thing over there, and I'm going to flip to Matthew chapter 25. You see, in the book of Matthew, chapter 25 is this parable that Jesus talks about. And I, for one, have never put this parable with faith without works is dead being alone. But as Adam was preaching over the parable of the talents a few weeks ago, it came to me, and I drew a conclusion, and I want to show you and see if you agree with this conclusion. So in Matthew chapter 25, beginning in verse number 14, we're going to go ahead and read the parable of the talents. And I want you to hang on to what we've just talked about in James chapter 2, starting in verse number 14 and on. So in Matthew chapter 25, in verse number 14, let's begin reading. It says, "The kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling to a far country who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. Unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. Then he that had received 5 talents went and traded the same and made them other 5 talents. And likewise he that had received 2, he also gained another 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. After a long time the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoned with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought the other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. He that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. Verse 23, And the Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Then he that had received 1 talent came and said, I knew thee, that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not straw. I was afraid, and I went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast what is thine. In verse 26, And his Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reaped where I sowed, not gathered where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming should I have received mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it to him that hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This parable of the talents, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and I appreciate this lesson that Adam did for us to help us to explain what a talent is. It's a large volume of something. It's wealth. It's dollars. A large volume of it. And so you have these 3 different servants that are delivered the piles of wealth or whatever this is. And it was based on what that servant's abilities were. The master of the home here gives 1 5 and 1 2 and 1 1. Right? So now based on their abilities, he's separated out his wealth. He says, I'm going to go take my journey. I'll see you all when I return. And it says after a long while, he returns and he wants to take an account of what have you done with the talents which I have given you? The 5-talent man there being able to stand and tell his master, I have turned again 5 more. I have gained in what you have given me. The 2-talent man again, I have gained with 2 more. James tells us back in chapter 2 that we use works to justify, right? By works, a man is justified before his master. What if, we're here in Matthew 25, what if the 5-talent man who was given a load for his 5 talents worth of money, and he had given back to his master those same 5 talents and had not turned it into 10? It's pretty easy to see how the master would have responded, because the master responds to the 1-talent man who did that exact thing. See, the master didn't care how much he got back. He didn't care that the fact that that this 5-talent man, he made 5 more, so now I'm double, right? Well, he gave the 2 man 2, and he doubled it. Now he's got double. I mean, double your investment is fantastic investing, I believe. So does it matter that if he had given one servant 10 talents to begin with, and his servant gave him 10 back plus another 10? Do you think he would have been more pleased with his servant had he done more and more and more? Well, no. It says the master gave to each one his several ability. It's so interesting when we think about talents, if we were to equate it to quarters, right? I'm going to give one person 10 quarters or 5 quarters. I'm going to give one person 2 quarters. I'm going to give one person 1 quarter. And when we think about volumetrically, that's not a lot. 5 quarters, $1.25, and you get back another $1.25. I got $2.50. Okay, great. Well, you buried your 1 quarter. All right, so I get 25 cents back. It was a huge amount of money that was given, or wealth given, to these servants. The fact that the 1-talent servant was given anything to begin with should show you that this man tried something. He was worth something. His master said, I'm going to make you accountable for this. We can't think of it in terms of quarters, right? It's not fair for us to equate this analogy to quarters. We need to take this account, and we need to put $1 billion perhaps. I mean, let's throw some unbelievable amount of money. The master judged his servant worthy to receive $1 billion, $1 million, $100,000, whatever number you want to say. It wasn't a quarter. And so the master looks out and he says, I'm going to make you accountable for this large sum of money. To one he gave 2, for another he gave 5. Large sums of money based on their ability. In order for us to follow the analogy, let's take talents, and let's turn that into things that we can do with what we have. What did the church do in Acts chapter, it's just slipped my mind. In the first century, when the church was established, they had pieces of property and they would sell their property, right? So in Acts chapter 4, we read about Barnabas, who had a piece of property, and he sold it, and he laid the amount of the property at the apostles' feet. He was able to do this work. He was able to give this large volume of money to the church to help the church. He did what he could with what he had. See, Ananias and Sapphira, when they follow after him, they tried to cheat, and they said, well, I have, but I'm only going to do a little bit. Almost like that 1-talent man that had something. And he said, I'm just going to do a little bit. James says you're justified by works. Your faith is visible by works. I cannot see an aura around you that shows how much faith that you have. You can't, just because you held your hand up a second ago and said, I have faith, you have proved to me nothing by raising your hand. What has proved something to me is that you're here tonight. You chose to be here with the saints, worshiped and assembled tonight. That's a showing of your faith. The 1-talent man, he was given an opportunity. He was given something. You have responsibility now. And he chose to put his head in the sand and do nothing, right? He put his head in the dirt and he did nothing with that talent that he had. What does James tell us about faith and works? Does he not say, even so, faith without works is dead, being alone? Why did the master respond so harshly to that one-talent servant. Back in verse number 26, it says, the Lord answered and said unto him, thou wicked and slothful servant. He called him evil and lazy. He said, I gave you a talent. I gave you everything that you needed to be profitable. I gave you everything. And I didn't ask any more than what you could handle, right? He said, he didn't give a one-talent man 5 talents to overwhelm him. Now, the Lord handed him 1 talent, and he said, this is for you to handle and manage. I know, based on my observations, I know what kind of person you are. So when the 1-talent man looks at his master and he says, well, I was afraid. I knew that you were what does he say there? He says, I was afraid and went and hid thy talent in the earth. You are a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you had not strawed. I was afraid. What are we going to do with our talents? Right? We've been talking about responsibilities tonight. I'm not talking about wealth. Because it's not for us to determine the volume of someone's faith based on the money that they have. Right? That's an unrealistic measurement of faith. How much money did Jesus himself have? The man didn't work. Right? And when it came time to pay taxes, where did he get money to pay taxes with? He went to a fish and pulled a coin out of his mouth to pay taxes. Jesus Christ didn't have a 9-to-5 and didn't make an abundant amount of salary. Would you consider him to be a working individual? Absolutely, right? Absolutely. So this 1-talent man, given this large volume of wealth, known what his abilities are, not to overwhelm him, the master says, I know you can handle this. And the 1-talent man said he was afraid, and he chose not to do anything with his talent. The Lord answers him and says, you wicked and lazy servant, thou knew that I reaped where I had sowed not, gather where I had not strawed. Thou oughtest to have put my money to good use, that when I came again, I could have gotten mine own with usury. James tells us very clearly that we need to do something with the talent that we have. Each one of us has been given something, right? Maybe not all of you can stand up in the pulpit and preach. Sometimes I don't think I can. Not all of us can maybe feel comfortable teaching a Bible class. Maybe not all of us feel comfortable doing other activities that are done here in the building. However, each one of us has a talent, has a gift, has a blessing from God, and we're required to do something with that talent. You all raised your hands and you told me you have faith. I need you to show me you have faith. James says, a man may say, thou hast faith and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. Folks, our whole lesson this morning was based on showing you what faith looks like. And tonight is your opportunity to show me what faith looks like. Our calling by God is to go forth and save this world, right? Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And Jesus himself says, lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the earth. Revelation tells us to be faithful unto death, and he will give us that crown of life. We have a mission statement. I love asking, we talk to our kids, what's your number 1 goal? The number 1 goal is to get to heaven. What's your number 2 goal? To get as many people there with me as I can. That should be our number 1 mission. James says your faith without action, without anything to follow it up, it's just as useless as someone praying for the sick and never carrying medicine to them. He says it's just like looking at someone who's starving to death and you tell them, be warmed and filled, go in peace. Right? Faith without works is worthless words. Talk is cheap. Actions speak louder than words. Right? There's a reason we have adages that we say, common coined phrases. Talk is cheap. Actions speak louder than words. Do you think that's biblically based? James tells us specifically. if you're going to tell me you have faith, you got to show me, right? If you consider the example that James uses in chapter 2 as he looks at Abraham, and he says, was not Abraham justified by works when he had offered Isaac upon the altar? If you go back and you read the account of God's promise to Abraham that he was going to have a child, the struggles that Abraham and Sarah went through during that whole process of fulfilling this promise by God, you go through and read about the trials that Abraham went through, and he's called faithful not because of him getting up and out of the country, which that's over in Hebrews chapter 11. In James, he focuses on he offered his son a sacrifice. There's a type and anti-type there, I just know it. He was counted faithful not because he and God had a conversation and God said, I want you to offer Isaac, and Abraham said, okay, I would do that for you, God. Do you think would that be good enough? Yeah, I agree. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It took Abraham. I don't know if y'all had seen it, but there was a few years ago a TV series that had come on, and sometimes these TV series that come on and talk about historical, biblical things, they're pretty atrocious to watch. And some of them, it actually helps your mind's eye to see what could have happened, to put some kind of imagery with the words that we read. And in this particular series, and I wish I could reference it properly, we had Abraham and the Isaac scenario acted out. And I didn't understand the weight, and for whatever reason, it didn't cross my mind as Abraham has now taken Isaac. He's loaded wood onto his back, Isaac maybe being a preteen, teen, maybe an older child even, had watched this boy grow into a young man. And he's loaded wood on his back, and he's told him, we've got to go up the hill. And Isaac is saying, Father, what are we going to offer as our sacrifice? And Abraham responds to him, the Lord will provide. And then as they get up to the top and they build the altar, and Isaac is like, Dad, what's going on? You know, and they're stacking these rocks on top of each other. And they're building this altar to offer a sacrifice. They're laying the logs on it. And Abraham, through tears, ties his son up, lays him on top, and his eyes are huge. And he says, Dad, what are you doing? What's happening? And Abraham grabs the knife, and he stands up over his son, and he's got it up over his hands, and he's crying, and he's calling out, and oh, I can't do this, and his knife comes down. The Lord says, stop. Talk is cheap, right? Abraham could have said, I believe God, I trust God, I follow you. God says, offer me Isaac. I can do that. But as Abraham is following through, he's bringing the knife down. Stop. Can you imagine the crumpled man of Abraham? Faith without works is dead being alone, guys. It took Abraham, coming down with a knife. So you told me that you have faith. You raised your hands. It's definitely time to show it. It's time to show it. You know, I think it's interesting in chapter 2, verse number 19 in James, it says, Thou believest that there is one God, meaning that you say you have faith. You do well. Good job. Pat on the back. It says the devils believe also, that they tremble. Folks, if we say that I have talents, I've been given gifts from God, I've been given blessings from God, and then we say I'm not going to do anything with it, and I'm going to stick it in a hole and bury it, and when the Lord comes to render his goods from me, I say, well, here's exactly what you gave me, and I did nothing with it. It says that your faith is weak. It says it's dead, it's alone. And he says, honestly, you're no better than the demons. because they at least confess and understand who Jesus is, and they tremble. It scares them to death. So what do we do with our talents? It says Abraham believed God, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. Do you want to be a friend of God? Are you willing to go to the calling, answer the calling that God has given to you? You know, my purpose for tonight's lesson had intended to be us going through Hebrews chapter 11 and looking at every example that made it to the hall of faith. And us taking a real look at every single one of them and seeing how can I what can I do so that my name could be written in the hall of faith, Hebrews chapter 11. What physical things could you do to be written in the hall of faith? Not for boasting, but to make sure that I'm the 5-talent man, or that I'm the 2-talent man, that I'm not the 1-talent man who stuck my head in the sand and did nothing with what God had blessed me with. Not very good at math, but I know there's 24 hours a day, and there's 7 days a week, and there's 364 days a year, 5 days a year. I can't do math. But y'all with your fancy pocket calculators can figure out there's a lot of time that we could be using our talents. I hope that y'all can take some encouragement from this. I hope that you'll remember that we are called to do more, right? Verses 14 through 16 is the ones that say, if a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and you say, be ye warmed and filled, go in peace. Brother Acuff said, if we're going to pray for the lost, then we better get out there and start saving them. Folks, that's the kind of things that we need. If we're going to sit up here and we're going to pray to God for the sick to get healed, we better start carrying some medicine. If we're going to pray for the lost to come to know Christ, better start carrying our Bibles out there. If we're going to pray for anything that so-and-so overcomes their temptations, folks, we need to be there with them and help them. The definition of a vain prayer is one that has no depth, no meaning. That 1-talent man's actions with his talent had no depth and no meaning. He buried it in the sand, and his Lord was wroth with it. The God of heaven has given you talents and has asked you, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to bury your head in the sand? Are you going to stand up and do the things that we need to do? If you have a need tonight to put on Christ in baptism, to be added to the Lord's church, we want that to be done tonight. And as a Christian, as one that raised your hand earlier, I want you to take deep consideration. Where are you tonight? Is your head in the sand? Is your 1 talent buried deep as to no one can find it and use it, or you perhaps may have to exercise it? Or are you the 5 and 2-talent man that is out there working and doing what we should? I would love to sit down and create a list of all of the works that you could be doing, the works that we're called to be doing. Coming to services is one small piece. That 1-talent man, it wasn't a small thing that he was given. It was huge. It was life-changing, and it was a huge responsibility. There are some times that I, in the past, have been over or in charge of multi-million-dollar projects. I don't enjoy that much responsibility, but it was given to me because somebody judged that I was capable of managing multi-million-dollar projects. The 1-talent man was given a multi-million-dollar thing, life-changing, and he didn't do anything with it, and it cost him everything. The word from Matthew chapter 25, cast the unprofitable servant out, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't want anyone to end up where it's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Let's use our talents. Let's work together as a group. Let's make Valdosta Church of Christ a fully functioning, talented church. If you have a need tonight, please come while we stand and sing.